Welcome to Galaxy Tenants, an Earthbound podcast from the Milky Way galaxy. My name is Jay Picard, and co-producing this episode is my wife Carly.
With the cancellation of the 2020 Black Rock City build, we thought we'd share a few of our favorite stories from our time in the desert. We hope you enjoy.
Months in the making, Burning Man, a 70,000-person celebration of art and culture, challenges attendees to sustain for an entire week in the desert, utilizing radical self-reliance. For these two burners, the quest began in June, with excessive preparation, concluding only once upon the playa. The dried-up prehistoric lakebed allows for no sustaining life outside of the unclassifiable group of world travelers. From Denver, Colorado, we departed on our 2,200-mile trek across the country, tuning into one public radio jazz station after another, heading a mere 15 hours west to the small desert town of Lovelock, Nevada, which would become our sort of outpost as wild and unpredictable events began to unfold. Our early morning Sunday arrival triggered sleep, followed by last-minute shopping and a few hours of kitchen prep and meal freezing. The final packing of the vehicle led to a humorous unpacking, repacking, and cramming of items. Exhausted, we enjoyed one last night in a real bed, though we tossed and turned in anticipation of what the following day would bring. We awoke Monday morning at an early hour to a call from our great friend and fellow burner, Murray. "The gates are closed. Once you've processed that, call me back," he said in a tired voice. So many questions came to mind, and after further discussion and a quick tune to Burning Man Information Radio, BMIR, yielded the reality that a storm had passed through, leaving standing water on the playa. Lightning struck the BMIR tower as well as an individual, resulting in minor injuries. As the day progressed, Burning Man released the following statement. Rainstorms closed Burning Man until Tuesday. Black Rock City, August 25, 2014. Organizers of the annual Burning Man event are asking any participants traveling to the event now to postpone their arrival until at least Tuesday morning. Black Rock City has shut down following rainstorms that left standing water on the playa, leaving it undrivable. Nevada Highway Patrol will be directing traffic away from Highway 447 at Wadsworth. Local law enforcement have also begun turning around traffic at the event entrance on Highway 34, northeast of Gerlach. Drivers are being instructed to find a safe location to park until the expected reopening of the event on Tuesday. Organizers expect the rain to dissipate and the playa surface to dry out by midday Tuesday, and participants will be allowed to enter the event again. From BMIR on the playa, we ascertained that there was a possibility of the porta potties being closed due to service trucks not being able to access them. The radio host was seeking individuals to distribute toilet paper and was encouraging folks to utilize buckets or make friends with your neighbors with motorhomes. Even as we sat in Lovelock tuning in to sporadic broadcasts coming out of Black Rock City, all we could do was think about getting to Burning Man. After the initial announcement regarding the closure of the Black Rock City gates, Burning Man's social media networks became a vacuum, with no information coming out of the organization. The feeling of being in limbo was heavy. The day began with an extended waiting game without the satisfaction of movement ever becoming realized. Around 9 o'clock p.m., rumors began to surface that the gates had reopened. Without official confirmation and the evening growing later, we planned for a Tuesday a.m. departure from the Lovelock outpost. We made arrangements to be guided over a couple of back road passes that would ideally shave hours off of our wait time to enter the magical land. The news came early Tuesday that the gates were indeed open and that the conditions were such that the playa had returned to some level of normalcy. Our convoy headed down I-80, pulling off at a small exit with no services. We crossed a cattle guard and traversed over Ragged Top, down an hour-long gravel road towards Gerlach. We passed cattle on the open range, wild mustangs, and dried-up riverbeds without ever seeing another vehicle. After a crazy ride down a road that seemed to lead to nowhere, we hit 447 and gassed up our vehicle using a red can provided by Carly's father. A mere 15 clear miles down 447, and we found ourselves passing through Empire and pulling onto the cracked playa, which seemed to have little to no weight in regards to vehicles. We were directed towards the will call line, which seemed manageable. Planes dropped in at a non-stop rate to the Black Rock City airport, dropping burners off and returning to the sky to pick up more. 2.5 hours later, with our tickets in hand and the line now somewhere near a 6-hour wait, we made our way through the gates, which boasted a zero law enforcement presence, counter to the rumors of feds and canines, and we pulled into the camps. The roads were laid out by the letters A through K, running parallel to the inner playa road, Esplanade, while the perpendicular roads were named after the times on a clock. With the 9 o'clock side of the camping grid near full, we headed past 6 o'clock and found a comfortable spot with ample room at 5 o'clock and Jade, and began our setup for a week in the desert. We quickly erected our tent, Murray's tent, his clothes tent, and shower tent, and Murray's massive teepee that would act as our community space. As the sun set, we took a breather, decorated our bikes as best we could with glowing objects and a box of wine, and headed down 5 o'clock toward the playa for our first glimpse of the chaos. As we looked around at the incredible scale of the city, it was hard not to be overwhelmed at all of the stimulation and possible choices of direction. In the distance, we saw the temple, as well as totem of confession that looked like something from an Indiana Jones movie. To the left, I could see another large human structure that looked like a woman. Everywhere we looked, there was something incredible happening. We made our way down the wooden stairs, back through the courtyard, through the maze, exited, and made our way to one of the stages, where Spukes parked right in front as a beautiful young lady spun fire poi. We headed back to our bikes where I lined up the proper code and we were on our way, but not before taking a moment to stare at a large skeleton on chains being controlled by people on the ground. It clanked and cracked loudly and made me uncomfortable, which I enjoyed. We collected ourselves and made haste towards Totem of Confession, which had a huge line of people out front waiting to enter. As it was our first night in Black Rock City, we decided to keep moving toward the Love Potion Amorpha art car, which was outputting a fantastic LED display in a large bottle atop their bus. We stood present, scratching our heads and looking around without saying a word, before it was decided that we would ride in another random direction. The first structure that we came upon in the new direction was a large 2-story cubed structure that had LED lights along its exterior lines and a large female face painted on the side facing us. We walked up to it and stared into some dusty mirrors on the side before noticing a small slot. Murray approached with a card in hand that read, "The Life Cube Project." On the other side of the card, participants were encouraged to write down their dreams, wishes, and goals and insert them into the slot. I looked back over my shoulder where I saw Spukes sitting on what appeared to be a low bench. He had a shit-eating grin on his face. Then, what looked to be a lobster drove by. We hopped back on our bikes and came to a collective stop to decide where we were heading. A large boardroom table with board members sitting in suits and a man on top of the table yelling drove by. It was pure insanity. In our haze, we noticed my favorite art car, El Pulpo Mecanico, heading right for us, blasting fire. I felt a childlike excitement come over me, as if I were about to meet Santa Claus. He came to a stop just short of where we were standing, and a ton of people surrounded the large metal octopus as if to worship their god. "Welcome to the Church of El Pulpo Mecanico," I muttered to Spukes. With every explosion of fire, you could feel the extreme heat roar over the top of you with power and welcome warmth. We rode out past a set of wind-up teeth to a 3-story wooden structure with a bright rainbow on top. We locked up our bikes and headed up the rickety stairs that led to dead ends, only to have to turn around and pass other climbers. Back on the playa, we once again filled our glasses with wine. We made our way towards what looked like a small radio tower with an LED blanket hanging underneath. On the ground there were a ton of burners spacing out to the changing array of colors. We continued riding past a large fairy tale-looking boot house called Storied Haven that had a long line that extended out of its gate and only stopped once we arrived at the temple. We locked up our bikes, filled up on wine, and walked toward the sizable wooden cornucopia, past fire spinners and folks sitting on the ground in front of it. Surrounding the temple, there were small wooden designs that had lights shining inside of them. We entered the temple and immediately began to see pictures of folks whom we'd lost, as well as messages of love and heartache. For some reason at that moment I didn't feel sad, as I did in the previous year's temple. Instead, I smiled as we walked further into its spiraling core until it bottlenecked and felt like the line wasn't moving. We turned around and walked out past an influx of people still coming in. A man inquired, "Where's Timothy Leary's funeral?" To which I smiled and said, "That's good." He replied by saying, "What's the answer?" To which I said, "There is no answer." As we exited, 2 young men to our right were clutching each other in all-out laughter. I found it an odd, uncharacteristic reaction to the temple and smiled. We slowly returned to our bikes and headed towards a spinning piece of art that changed colors as participants spun it in one direction, then the opposite, while onlookers stared in amazement. We continued on and stopped at a piece that we recognized called Brainchild, which was a sitting baby's legs on the bottom and a tube-like shape that looked like it had nerves coming out of it, connecting on the top in a circular shape with a light inside. I knocked on its base, creating a hollow, resonating noise. We continued to ride across the open playa, passing groups of bikers, art cars, and people on foot heading towards White Ocean, a large sound camp, at 10 o'clock in Esplanade. We parked and locked up, cueing another massive pouring of wine. Our cups were full on so many levels. We headed into the circle of glowing spires that were shooting fire and danced our asses off. Behind me read a large sign that said, "Fuck it." That pretty much summed up my thoughts at the time. We danced and consumed wine for a solid amount of time before deciding to head back towards camp to chill for a bit. We rode down Esplanade laughing and joking when we were blindsided by our first bad dust storm of the week. We put on our goggles and pulled our bandanas up over our noses and mouths. We attempted to ride slowly before it became impossible in the madly euphoric environment. I glanced over my right shoulder and connected with Carly, where we stood in place until we were able to see slightly. There was no sign of Murray or Spukes. We made our way into the camps, almost unsure of what direction we were heading. As it was our first night back in BRC, and Spukes' first night ever in BRC, we assumed the worst. We assumed he was wandering aimlessly through the dust, though we had much more confidence in Murray's ability. We rode and rode, stopping at 6 o'clock in I, where we took a second to recall that we were actually camped off of 5 o'clock in J. We continued towards camp and pulled up through the dust to shockingly find a parked bicycle in the waves of dust, and Spukes laying flat on the ground, possibly passed out, possibly eating a sandwich. Murray pulled in right behind us while we were in shock over Spukes' ability to locate camp. We cracked beers in a celebratory fashion as waves of dust blasted our camp. Do you like horse meat or Vicodin? If so, join us at Opulent Tent at 5 o'clock in J, I chirped as we joked and laughed insanely as our night faded. We climbed into our tent, where we found a layer of dust which made no sense at all, as all of our windows were closed. We laid down, closed our eyes, and fell asleep immediately to the quiet of the Black Rock City suburbs. Hey, are you guys in there? I'm back, Spuke said, waking us up for our longer-than-expected slumber. It's almost 11 p.m. There was an hour-and-a-half line at the gate, and they were running dogs up and down the rows like the border, Spuke stated, laughing. He followed up by saying, This is Harry. I picked him up in Wadsworth. He was hitchhiking. We introduced ourselves to Harry, who informed Spukes that he was going to do some recon and look for his friends. I'll leave that car door open for you, and you can grab your gear whenever, Spuke said. Harry wandered off, and Spuke said to me, I can't get the fog lights to turn off on Murray's car. And he proceeded to try to figure it out. Unbelievably, the folks in the camp next to us who had just pulled in were dealing with the exact same issue. It made no sense. I watched, scratching my head before texting Murray as Spukes looked through the manual. Murray checked a couple of customer service forums and came up empty before Carly found the button on top of the steering column. I headed over to the neighbor's car and offered them our solution, which was not universal. The following day, we headed back to camp, opened up some beers, and started to snack as Harry walked up to retrieve the last of his items. The wind and dust picked up, so he entered the teepee, where he was welcomed by a bag of fresh strawberries from Carly and Murray's cooler. We sat, avoiding the heavy dust, discussing an array of topics, landing on what I do for a living. As I spoke, Harry seemed almost familiar with the places, companies, and musicians that I spoke of, triggering Carly to ask, What do you do for a living, Harry? In a calculated manner, he said, Well, I used to be a DJ, to which I interrupted and said, DJ Harry? Yes, he responded. I stared at him blankly for a moment before asking, The DJ Harry? Yes, he replied. Wild. I've seen you around the country at shows and festivals, I said in disbelief. The conversation continued with Harry and I speaking of mutual acquaintances, the business, and his future in music. Harry headed on his way, with plans of reconnecting with us that night or the following day. I began to cook tacos and quesadillas as Spukes wrote on the whiteboard, or Opulent Tent marquee, and cleaned out Opulent Tent for the evening's party. Do you like playa dust, oxygen, or single-ply toilet paper? If so, join us at Opulent Tent at 5 o'clock in J, I said with laughter to follow. I awoke to a shaded tent with no chance of Carly rolling out of bed with me. Thinking it was about 10 a.m., I started some coffee and breakfast so that when Carly awoke, she could have, quote, breakfast in bed. I realized that I was way too chipper for day 5 of an event of this sort. There was rustling in the trailer, and Jenny emerged, looking surprised to see that I was up and active. What time is it? I asked. 1 p.m., Jenny responded, to which I laughed. God bless your awning, I said under my breath. Carly finally came to from the tent, with Jesse not far behind from the trailer. From Murray's tent, the sound of fans and Murray sawing logs poured out. We ate a large breakfast, rehydrated with vigor, and prepared for a short ride on the playa before securing the day's ice. For some reason, we all brought our red plastic cups with carabiners that Carly and Murray had made for the group. We rode down 4:30 until we hit the jazz cafe at Center Camp, where a live jazz band was performing. We locked up our bikes and headed into the somewhat crowded dome. At the entrance, there was a sign that listed the week's events at the camp. To my absolute delight, the schedule for the day read, Mingus and Mimosas from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m., and jazz jam session after the burn. Inside, we made our way to the bar with our cups in hand. A very friendly young man welcomed us and set us up with our mimosas, at which point our focus shifted to the music. We found a comfortable corner of the circle next to a Jerry Garcia doll and watched as a ragtag group of musicians absolutely crushed the music of Charles Mingus. I returned to the bar and inquired about another round of drink, while communicating that I understood that a no was possible in order to ensure that the supply remains for folks who had yet to drink. The gentleman replied that he appreciated my concern for the group while filling my glass to the near top. After an extended reprieve of enjoying live music of quality, we headed outside, a little bit more buzzed than when we arrived. "Hey, I have something for you," called out an older gentleman standing nearby. I approached and he gave our whole group necklaces with carabiners attached for our cups. We hugged and thanked him and rode towards Arctica to purchase a 6-pack of high-quality 7-pound bags of ice. I situated them on my shoulders and we rode back towards the teepee to ensure that our goods would not spoil in the midday sun. In the distance, a massive yacht sailed past, blasting beats, and packed with partying burners, contrasting the vibe of the temple. We rode towards the Black Rock Lighthouse service, passing a gentleman standing on his head next to a bicycle. The lighthouse appeared in the distance and then disappeared again as the dust picked up. I half expected it to appear in a different location. We arrived, locked up our bikes outside of the large, incredible structures, and wandered around. We stumbled upon a wedding on the backside of the largest lighthouse. The main chamber of the lighthouse was filled with ornate trinkets, books, and art. We headed upwards, climbing up a steep, somewhat rickety staircase ladder to the second level and onto a small balcony overlooking the ceremony. Then up to the third level, we peeked out onto another balcony before heading out onto a rope bridge which connected to one of the secondary towers. I peered around the tower, which was on a slant, providing a bit of discomfort for me as the plywood floors creaked under my weight. Back across the bridge was another climb up to yet another level. We wandered around the 360 balcony, taking in the incredible panoramic views of the playa before slowly making our way back down to the ground level, where I exhaled a breath of relief when my feet hit the ground. We located our bikes and rode across the cracked prehistoric lake bed towards Funky Town, who was hosting an afternoon party. We pulled into the camp, located our friends, locked up our bikes, grabbed our cups, and headed to the bar. With our IDs presented and stamp obtained, we ordered drinks. Dancing ensued as the group hung out, laughed, and participated in a variety of nonsense. I noticed the Lost Tea Party in the distance, above some motorhomes, and headed that way on foot. Pickles and Carly joined me, and we arrived just as the group was preparing for departure. The train of elevated teapots was surrounded by guards with large staffs who marched alongside, maintaining a perimeter for safety. As they marched by, one of the guards gently poked my belly with his staff, and I laughed like the Pillsbury Doughboy, triggering a roar from the group. The encampment passed by and faded into the distant dust. Carly and I walked just a couple of camps over along 10 o'clock to get a look at Robot Heart's cherry picker and signature robot head. As we wandered back to Funky Town, we were intersected by Pickles and Murray and were approached by a slender gentleman in gold booty shorts. "Here, I think you need this," he said, handing me something. I looked down at what I was holding in my hand and read the words, "Crystal Boof Kit." I immediately began laughing and handed it back, to which the man refused. "It's yours," he said, handing both Pickles and Murray a kit as well. Murray looked less than thrilled as I opened the kit to find instructions, a large crystal, wipes, lube, a breath mint, a condom, and a Burning Man chakra sticker. The man explained that he had made 500 and even wandered over to the medical to give them a kit and fill them in on what they may be dealing with later. It was a humorous moment among a sea of insanity. We rode back towards camp down the long roads from 2 o'clock, finally passing the Twistine Chapel that housed the 70-plus-year-old naked popes that kept a presence at the camp. We arrived at our home base to find a Wook passed out in the hammock, inevitably. At camp, we tried on all sorts of insane costumes and accessories before selecting our evening's attire. We ate a satisfying meal, cracked our glow sticks for the night, and headed down 5 o'clock towards Esplanade. Besides Carly, none of the group had seen Black Rock City at night, with so much dust overtaking the scene. It was surreal. We stood and watched as yet another pirate ship passed by, blasting beats to the packed ship of fools. We made a quick stop at Thunderdome to obtain the battle times before heading out to Calliope for an impromptu throwdown. We parted ways with Murray and headed over to Planet Earth, where we entered to a packed house, all getting down to Parliament Funkadelic's We Want the Funk. We then headed out towards the dance clubs at 10 o'clock. The clubs were empty, so we danced around like idiots, consuming wine and watching the bursts of fire from the far stage. As it grew closer to the time that we were supposed to meet Murray at Thunderdome, we saw fireworks going off in the distance, signifying the Trojan horse's inevitable burn. We made haste, only slowing down to ride through a warped wooden tunnel lit with different colored LEDs. The circle surrounding the horse was massive as a procession of art cars drove around it, firing fireworks and Roman candles that bounced off of its sides. Eventually, it exploded with fireworks as well as a deep propane blast, and it was engulfed in flames. Before the structure fell, we hit the bathrooms and headed towards Thunderdome, which was crawling with wildly dressed burners, including Murray, of course. The event's host and official announced that we would first enjoy some fire spinning and live opera. The woman's voice was incredible, setting the mood for the epic battles that would follow. With the music's conclusion, the huge crowd began to chant, "2 men enter, 1 man leaves. 2 men enter, 1 man leaves." The hair on my arms stood straight up as the evening's first participants were strapped into the harnesses. The contenders were pulled to the edge of the dome, and upon a cue from the official, the warriors flew at one another, bouncing as they collided, swinging large pillow swords. Through 3 rounds of intensity they battled until a winner was declared. I found myself yelling throughout the entire match. Around the 3rd or 4th bout, a massive, Viking-looking motherfucker was brought in for a battle. He grimaced, growled, and looked downright scary as the fight began. The 2 contenders collided in a fierce engagement. At one point, the massive beast of a man started using the butt end of his weapon to inflict damage. His weapon bounced off of his opponent's head and out of his hands as he resorted to fists, to the surprise of the crowd. That was the moment that the illusion of Thunderdome became real and pure, unfiltered aggression poured out onto the playa. The match was called due to the smaller man bleeding down his face, and surprisingly, yet rightfully so, the match was awarded to the beast. In an attempt to mellow out and regroup, we returned to camp for a couple of hours of cold beers and on-the-spot humor, including some fire drumming from Jesse. Jesse and Jenny called it a night, while myself, Murray, and Carly continued to party on the playa. We returned to Calliope for a couple more hours of drinking and dancing, as the previous evening turned into a new day's dawn. We sluggishly made our way back to the teepee and then to our tent for what would be the longest night of rest. The following day, the man would burn. Spukes said his brief goodbyes almost apologetically. I began furiously packing up the bins, bedding, and tearing down what remained of our camp. Carly and I attempted to talk about the situation, resulting in minor bickering as we crammed items into the Jeep. It was a hopeless situation that no one expected. In the 6 years that Carly has attended Burning Man and the 3 that I have followed, we've never experienced the relentless beating that we had taken this year. The last few items were forcibly packed into the car and the doors pushed shut. As I did so, a gentleman from the French camp wandered over, opened a Tupperware container, and said, "Hello, do you like a crepe?" "A what?" I said, stepping back. "A crepe," he repeated. "Oh, a crepe. No, I'm good. We're about to take off," I said. "One for the road?" he insisted. "A crap?" I said sarcastically. "No, I'm good. Thanks, friend," I said, putting my hand on his shoulder. Carly and Jenny posed for a couple of photos and shed a couple of tears. We told them that we looked forward to seeing them at our wedding in October, and we were on our way. We drove past camps of folks hunkered down and attempting to hold the pieces together, many with smiles on their faces. We rode down the rows which were once designated for the mass entrance, this time towards the exit. Just before we hit the pavement, we passed about 5 police cars that had surrounded a single hippie. The cops were wearing flak jackets and had all kinds of military-issued gear on. To our right, an additional cop ripped across the playa at about 90 miles an hour towards the scene, which had clearly already been secured. The 2-hour ride back to Lovelock was sad and dismal. We pulled into Carly's parents' driveway and pulled out our essentials for the evening. We headed into the air-conditioned house and took our first dust-free shower in about 4 days. We laid our heads down on our pillows and closed our eyes. What could have easily been the end of our journey was instead a new beginning. We awoke a very long 10.5 hours later in a daze, staring up at the ceiling of the guest bedroom. We crawled to the kitchen for coffee and tuned into the alternate news outlets like BMIR, Burners.me, and the Burning Man live feed. Everything seemed to be clear and the winds had seemed to have died down. Caffeinated, we headed to a small casino in Carly's hometown and ate at the Black Rock Grill. We ordered large meals and began to plot our return to Burning Man. We headed back to Carly's parents' house and emptied the Jeep, only to repack it with essential items that we would need for one more day at Burning Man. We departed that afternoon in high spirits, blasting reggae in the car as we made our unexpected return to Black Rock City. We looked up the time of the burn and realized that we would make it back with ample time, assuming the line wasn't too long. We passed through Fernley, Wadsworth, and Gerlach, which was a virtual ghost town. We pulled onto the playa and didn't see a single car in either direction. We drove past where the first checkpoint was towards the second checkpoint. We were told to hold on as it was shift change for the greeters. I was skeptical, as most things people tell you at Burning Man are pure nonsense. I half expected to have some sort of clever trick played on us. We waited while a group of about 5 volunteers gathered off to our right. We continued to wait as they seemed to be having a pre-shift meeting. I glanced in my rearview mirror and found that it was just our car waiting to re-enter. I checked my phone for the time, and about 10 minutes later a guy walked up to our car. As he went to scan our parking pass, we communicated that we were re-entering and showed him our guest bracelets. He called another guy over who waved us in. We scratched our heads as to why we couldn't have just been waved in prior to the meeting. There was no joke to be played. We pulled back into the camps and made a right down K, turning left into our former camp. We arrived to a message in our previous spot that welcomed us back. Jenny and Jesse greeted us with hugs and excitement. It was already getting cold, so I changed into pants prior to unpacking our camping chairs, table, cooker, and bikes. Jesse turned on BMIR over the speakers of their trailer, and the hosts were talking about funk, which caught my attention. "Play Mothership Connection," I jokingly said, and just seconds later they did, followed by a handful of additional Parliament Funkadelic songs for about an hour. It was one of my favorite moments of the week, and put me in such an incredible place for the evening. We drank beers and prepped our bikes with glowing lights for the evening's adventures. Jesse popped out of the trailer in a white sparkling suit and an afro, fitting the vibe perfectly as he rode around doing tricks on his homemade big wheel bike. The sunset triggered our ride down 5 o'clock towards the Man. The wind blew across my face as I rode, and I felt extremely blissful. We pulled across Esplanade and made our way to the bathrooms on the 9 o'clock road from the Man. We locked up our bikes and hopped in line. Ridiculous banter ensued as folks were in rare form for the climax of their week. We reconvened at the bikes following our emptying, where we found a bottle rocket in Carly's basket. We left the bikes locked up where they were, poured some wine, and made our way back towards the face of the Man through the incredible ring of art cars. As we stood waiting, fire spinners captivated the crowd. At one point, folks started telling others to sit down, and we found ourselves uncomfortably sitting and waiting for a solid 30 minutes or so. The Man's arms rose, and the incredible display began. There was a moment where we decided to stand up and walk out of the seated area and run back to the bathrooms before the Man went up in flames. This time we made it to the other side of the Johns, where the lines were significantly shorter. As we came out, the massive firework display began. Explosions of color burst in the night sky as the Man's heart caught fire and engulfed the structure quickly. Unlike the previous year, once it went up, it was quick to come down. As soon as the Man hit the ground, the crowd roared and then shattered into thousands of pieces, heading off into the night, each in a choose-your-own-adventure fashion.
Thanks for listening, and we leave you with Ravi Padmanabha performing Sleep Well, My Friend.